Here he is. Let's do it. Game time. ESPN's Buster Olney joins us every Thursday at 5:15. Brought to you by Mohawk, Army, Navy. Buster, you said the New York Yankees were going to make a trade. Well, they did, but for a bat. Chase Headley giving up Solarte and DePaula. Grade this trade, Buster.
I think it's a B. I think Solarte is an interesting player. You could envision him as being a guy who, helped them in terms of giving them depth the way that he did this year. But, let's face it, he's bounced around enough where he's not viewed as a primary prospect. And I do think Headley gives him the promise of something more, and he does have experience, and he has a lot of reason to want to play well here the last 2 months because he's building toward his free agency. And I do wonder sort of how he'll respond from going to Pitchers Park in San Diego to from a market where there isn't necessarily an expectation every year that you're going to contend for a World Series title to playing in New York. Maybe this is the perfect time to add a guy like that to give him some adrenaline. So I thought this was like the McCarthy trade. I thought it made them a little bit better, and at this stage, without any big fishes out on the trade market, maybe that's what you should be hoping for.
Now, if Chase Headley is able to regain his 2012 production, is there a chance the Yankees re-sign him? And then what happens next year when their other third baseman comes off his suspension?
Now, Brian Cashman described it as a rental the other day when they made the deal, and I think that's exactly what it is. I think this is a 2 months and done type of situation because they've got Mark Teixeira to play first base under contract. Alex Rodriguez is coming back. I thought at some point was convinced when all that stuff was going down a year ago that the Yankees, the Steinbrenner family would say, you know what, it's not worth it. We do not want this guy to be part of the organization. We don't like how this has come, how this has developed. And that hasn't been what the case has been at all. They basically are going into next year. I think they don't want to just simply pay him off the last $62 million to make him go away. I think he's going to be in spring training next year, and it is going to be really interesting.
And Alex Rodriguez would not play shortstop next year for the Yankees if they did have a third baseman like Chase Headley?
No, I think that went out the barn door probably 6-7 years ago when he started to get big and heavy. And I know Derek is not he's not a good shortstop now, but at the same time, I think Alex, after missing an entire year at age 39, that would be a whole lot to ask for Alex to play the position.
We've heard Cashman say he's open to anything. When he says anything, what does that mean? Are we going to see more trades like a Headley? Are we going to see him finally go get an arm? Who are we looking at?
I think that they'll look for a starting pitcher, and they'll, and I wish I could give you some great names, but I just don't think there are that many. I think, David Price, we thought was going to be traded. I think if the Rays, unless they collapse over the next 5 days, I don't think they're going to trade him. I think a guy like a Jorge De La Rosa, he might be a possibility, but I think the Rockies are going to ask a lot for him. Maybe, and I think there's a chance that John Lester of the Red Sox is going to be talked about if the Red Sox collapse 2 or 3 more games in the standings before the deadline. But, the Yankees aren't going to get involved in that because the Red Sox are not going to trade them Lester. If Lester gets traded, he's probably going to a National League team. So it's more incremental type stuff. And I do think, Brian has a history of this when you get close to the deadline of sort of being the guy sitting there saying, I'll take your extras. Yep, hey, just bring them over here. I'll take your bargains. And I think they probably would do something like that this year as well.
He's Buster Olney, joins us every Thursday at 5:15 thanks to Mohawk, Army, Navy. Hey, Buster, we read a report that says that even Brett Gardner and Dylan Betances are untouchable, and then Brian Cashman could be using them as trade bait. Is there any chance he would trade guys like that?
No, okay. I can't imagine that would be the case because, look, Betances has been unbelievable. And there probably would be teams that would be interested in him, but I can't imagine that the Yankees would get nearly as much in return as they would require to get him. Because remember, with David Robertson unsigned as an impending free agent, then it means that they're going to need a closer next year. Betances certainly has set himself up, to be someone to be considered for that.
All right, Buster, do the New York Yankees have a new arm by this time next week at the trade deadline?
Yes, I believe they will. I think they'll find somebody. I think they'll take advantage of the depth that you see among right-handed relievers right now being discussed. And it may not be a big name. It may not necessarily be a great name, but I think they're going to get somebody.
Wallace Matthews wrote an article on ESPN New York that basically when the Yankees signed Ellsbury, he was almost sure Gardner would be gone. But now when he's seen how much production Gardner's done this year, maybe they never should have signed Ellsbury. Did you expect this kind of outbreak in production from Brett Gardner?
I think he's always been a good player, and I know from talking with Brian about him in the past. I mean, in 2011, 2012, Brian would always say that, that he always thought that he was underrated, and when they would look internally at a lot of metrics, they felt that Gardner was a good player. And on top of that, let me tell you something. When you're talking about a professional showing up every day, doing his work, being a team guy, someone who, tries to help other players, someone who's a positive in the clubhouse, I mean, he checks all of those boxes. And so, since Brett Gardner showed up the first time, I know, Brian's a general manager, and he's not necessarily going to have a favorite player, and he's not someone who's going to want to be friends with the players. But I bet you Brett Gardner would be among his favorite Yankees that he's been around since he's been GM of the team. And they rewarded, and clearly they saw something in him because in spring training they gave him $50 million.
ESPN's Buster Olney with Armen and Levack on your home for New York Yankees baseball, 104.5 The Team. And Buster, you mentioned analytics, and so did Brian Cashman this week. He said that he really liked Chase Headley's hit velos. How much stock does Brian Cashman put in analytics, and has he put more stock into it as the years have gone on now that we're in 2014?
Well, I think he's been willing to change with the times. In fact, at the end of the 2005 season, Brian's deal was set to expire as general manager of the Yankees, and he did not think he was going to be retained. And he actually, in speaking with George Steinbrenner at that time, and he was giving his recommendation on what he thought the next general manager needed to do, he really talked a lot about the Red Sox, who'd won the World Series the year before with Theo Epstein as a general manager. And he said, look, we need to do a lot of the stuff that these guys are doing. And he was talking about in terms of, maximizing the possible return in the farm system, but he also was talking about using analytics and using statistics. And that, as you remember, it was long after Moneyball came out. And so Brian is not that guy. In other words, Brian doesn't pretend to say, boy, I know a lot of numbers and I know a lot about players. He basically felt that it was important to come in and hire people who are good at that stuff, and that's what he's done. And Steinbrenner basically heard all these recommendations, by the way, listened to him and said, look, I want you to be that guy. And so Brian, stayed on. He began to look for people who could do that type of thing, and that's how I think they've been able to get better as time has gone along over analytics, because Brian's been willing to change and been willing to listen to that.
When you said that he went in and hired people to do this, the Daily News had a great column on it this week in analytics and the New York Yankees and Brian Cashman. How big of a department are we talking? And is Brian Cashman, in his analytic department, is he relying on them, more than ever?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people exactly he has, but it's part of the conversation, and I think that they're really good in the way that I think the Red Sox certainly look at both sides of the coin. I know Billy Beane, the Oakland Athletics, look at both sides of that, where they want their head of their professional scouting is a guy named Billy Owens. And before they make a trade, they're going to call Billy Owens and say, hey, tell us what you see. But on top of that, they also do their statistical analysis of players. And they'll look at both of those things. And the Yankees are the same way. It's different than, for example, like the Houston Astros, who I think are very, extremely oriented in looking at the numbers first and the scouting second, whereas I think the Yankees look at both.
Now, you talked about Brian Cashman's ability to change and adapt, and I don't think he's done a terrible job, but I know a lot of people are calling for his head. Is there anything he can do short of making the playoffs to save his job? Like if they don't make the playoffs this year, is he out?
I don't think that would be a given at all, because the one thing we've seen from Hal Steinbrenner is that he's not his father. He's very patient. Last year their farm system was so bad and performed so poorly that if they had fired anyone and people in decision-making capabilities, where it was, if it was Mark Newman, who, oversees their player development, if it was Brian, if it was Damon Oppenheimer, I don't think it would have surprised anybody. And yet they didn't do anything. And that was Hal Stein.